This is our Wednesday web chat, a series of discussions on current and topical issues, which we have every first and third Wednesday of the month. We've got the issue of breast cancer for today, and we've got panelists who are patients, survivors, and a doctor and an advocate for the cause. And what we want to try and do is try and understand from them what they've been through, what their experiences have been. We also want to get an insight into what's coming in this space in terms of technology, in terms of new methods that might be helpful to patients down the line, what's going on in the world of research and development, I guess, in that area. This session is being recorded and we will have it up on the website. Now, breast cancer is the most common cancer in Singapore, women, right? In 2020, it accounted for 32% of all new cancer cases. Older women are more prone to breast cancer, but that doesn't mean younger women are safe from it. Now, breast cancer affects women and men too, to a very small extent, but I couldn't get a man on the panel. In 2019, Singapore spent around $375 million on cancer treatment drugs. And experts reckon that at this rate, the cost will exceed $2 billion by 2030. So it is an expensive disease to manage. Our panelists today who will weigh in on the various issues are Dr. Stephen Tucker. He is the founder and medical director of Tucker Medical, a Singapore-based multi-disciplinary medical center which was formed in 2011. Dr. Tucker's subspecialty focus is a prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of breast cancer. Dr. Tucker is a fellow of both the Singapore Academy of Medicine and the American College of Physicians, and an officer of the Chapter of Medical Oncologists, Academy of Medicine, Singapore. We have Amelia Tan. She's 30. She's a breast cancer survivor who was diagnosed with breast cancer in March of 2020. She's currently working as a part-time phonics teacher and also pioneering a smart home concept business. Irene Kang, she's a breast cancer survivor. She was diagnosed in 2012, a single mother of a pair of twins. She used to be a banker for more than 20 years. She's now post-cancer and has been a freelance fitness trainer and events manager since 2015. Marie Wee is a journalist and the owner of a creative agency that develops events that give back to society. On her birthday this year, she received a phone call informing her that a good friend of hers had a relapse of breast cancer and was on her deathbed. She lost that friend soon after. So this October, Marie held the inaugural Ride With Me charity cycling campaign to raise funds for the Breast Cancer Foundation. So it was Marie's initial discussion with me that prompted this whole session. I know Breast Cancer Awareness Month was in October, it's over, but breast cancer charges on regardless. It doesn't follow any schedule. So I thought it's always good to have a discussion around an issue which perhaps is something that we all need to try and understand a bit more. So Dr. Tucker, if I could just start with you in terms of breast cancer as an overview, what is the prevalence in Singapore, and what's the cure rate for it?
The prevalence or the incidence, we usually measure that as cases per 100,000. And the most recent Singapore specific statistics, it's about 70 or maybe 75 new cases, new diagnoses per 100,000 on an annual basis. That is the most rapidly growing of any kind of cancer in Singapore, higher than the incidence rates for prostate cancer, ovarian, colon, and lung. And it's important to think about colon and lung because they occur in both genders. And so the breast cancer incidence in Singapore has gone from about 25 cases per 100,000 in 1975 to now nearly 75 per 100,000 50 years later. And that's just a dramatic rise. And that's not Singapore. It's not only Singapore. That's happened across the US, across China, Korea, Japan, across what we call homogenous populations. So it's not just a DNA thing. It's far from a genetic thing because it's happening in genetically identical or homogenous groups like Shanghainese women or women in Seoul or Tokyo. So it's really pandemic, which means, as we all know, living through this pandemic, but it's an epidemic in every country, therefore pandemic. But as you asked, the survival rates are very, very high. And most people don't realize that when we're talking about stage 1 and 2 breast cancers, we should be talking about a 90 to 95, maybe even 98% 5-year cure rates. Stage 3, where it's in the lymph nodes, maybe 85% cure rates. But I guess what I'd point out, and I've told a lot of people, is it's very, very common, and it's very, very likely you're going to live through it. So how can you become empowered to try to make sure it never happens to you in the first place?
Can I just ask the ladies, maybe starting with Amelia, what your experience was when you first heard that you had it and was diagnosed with it, and what went through your mind?
When I first kind of suspected it, I kind of panicked, like I was fearful. But yet, on the other hand, I kind of was quite prepared for it because of the strong family history that I have. So I got it checked rather quickly within like a few days of experiencing some symptoms such as achy pain or discomfort. Yeah. So as I got myself diagnosed, I guess that was the point that my world went blank. Like it's so surreal that it's actually happening. But yet moving to this point, I guess early discovery of it actually helped in terms of my treatment plan and the chances of full recovery.
Okay. I understand you're also going to get married soon. Um, did you have your boyfriend at that point in time when you first discovered it?
Yes, so my current fiance was my boyfriend then.
No, just to understand, to help people who may be young like you and going through this, how did that process, how did you two manage that process?
I think back then I was the one being more panicky. Like for him, he was saddened by the news. Yet on the day of my biopsy, he actually took a relationship to the next level. He actually proposed on the day itself, assuring me that moving forward, regardless how tough the journey is, he's going to be there to go through with me.
Oh, fantastic.
What a good guy.
My situation was back in 2012 and very similar in terms of the emotional reaction when I found out to Amelia's case, when I found out I had breast cancer. I had mammogram and that was 8 months before, thinking that everything was okay. But strangely enough, on the night when I was about to sleep and going back to work after 2 weeks on holiday break, might have had some bizarre reason which I normally don't do is it reaches out to my right breast, and this point is important, and I discovered that I had a lump on my south of my right breast, and the lump is as hard as a marble. So and instantly I knew, like Amelia's case, that something was not normal. And early detection is very, very important. And not just that, action. So what happened was the next day, the very next day when I'm supposed to go back to work, I had to go on an emergency half day leave. Second half, without appointment, I went to see a doctor at NUH. 2 or 3 days later, I got my test result and I was confirmed breast cancer stage 2. Having said that, I was kind of uh, sad, and then at the same time, mentally prepared because it was before everything happens, and I knew, being my character, that I would be able to overcome the challenge. And one thing lead to another. I had my operation. After my operation, a month later, I had my treatment. But obviously, during the operation, they found out that they did an extraction of my lymph nodes on my right side, and they took out 15 lymph nodes and discovered out of 15 that 12 are cancerous. And in a way, they upgraded me to from stage 2, which is a tumor size of 3 centimeter, when they first diagnosed me, to stage 3A. In addition to that, they found that I was HER2 positive, which was layman term aggressive cancer. And thankfully, because I discovered it early, otherwise I could have not been around now, or it could have spread and metastatic to the other parts of my body. Thankfully, it was contained due to early discovery within my breast as well as my right side of my armpit. So I went through treatment after that. Long story short, I overcome it and I became stronger after that.
What was going through your head because you've got twins, right? How old were they at that point in time?
They were 8 years old, and yeah, very good question you asked. Is my the first thing that, in fact, first two things that came to my mind when a doctor disclosed the bad news to me is, so when am I going back to work? When can I go back to work was my first question. But to address to your specific question about my twins, the worry starts to creep in to say who is going to be taking care of my children, though I have helper. Uh, what crossed my mind was I started to plan actually that who is going to take care of my children from a day-to-day needs perspective, because I'm a very hands-on mother. And the second thing that came to my mind was I need to get help. And I immediately gather help by calling my brother to step up and say, and told him the bad news and tell him, can you please back me up? So essentially, these are the things that crossed my mind when I found out I got breast cancer stage 2 at that time.
And you left the job, right? You're now doing something else. You left that industry. Was there a reason for that?
Okay, I was in banking for more than 20 years because I was in stage 3A. The treatment that was prescribed to me was long and draggy, and it took a toll on my body. Although my original plan was after 6 months, which I had a discussion with my boss in Zurich, that I am given paid leave for 6 months and then I would be coming back. Turned out to be that because of my long drawn treatment, I couldn't get back to work. And I think more importantly is I wasn't in a condition to get back to work. I lost my confidence. As you know, breast cancer patient after going second round of chemo, they start losing their hair, the body starts to change, confidence starts to go down south. So all in all, I after 6 months, I decided not to go back to work because I wasn't ready at all, and I had to continue my treatment. So I decided to quit my job. So after treatment was over, I start thinking, drawing out the checklist that what is it that caused me to have breast cancer, and I discovered, oh, the one of the evil is actually stress at work. So I decided not to go back to work and actually focus more on my health, and therefore I went into freelance fitness instead of going back to banking.
Okay, cool. So Marie, for you, yours was a colleague who had cancer, and so what did that trigger in you?
It was an ex-colleague whom I'm very close with. I was not in touch with her for a few months. And because I left the job a few months ago, and on the night of my birthday, a very good friend, I saw a couple of missed call, a common friend, and I knew it sensed that something was wrong. So I called back and I heard the news that my friend was in the hospital and is at the last stage. And if I want to visit her, I better be fast. It was a shock because she had stage 0 when we first knew, just a couple of years ago, and she went for treatment and she was fine. And just a few months of not being in touch, the next I know um it's her last day or two that I have to go and visit her quick. Yeah.
Okay. So it's different scenarios here. And Dr. Tucker, I was just wondering whether you'd like to maybe comment on the various scenarios that you've just heard.
The common story we hear every day. It seems that both Irene and Amelia, we haven't met before. I'm, just sort of judging on the Zoom appearances, but clearly diagnosed before age 50. There's a trend to increasing diagnosis before age 50. I've had patients in their mid to late 20s. I've had patients get diagnosed while they're pregnant, while they're engaged, before their marriage. There are always an unlimited number of emotional questions that bounce back and forth in the patient's head, from the obvious, alive and dead, will I survive, to the theoretical and realistic, that whatever is the pain and suffering and discomfort of the treatment. Some people have an easier go. Some people need chemo. Some people don't. Some people have great insurance coverage, and some people have to take out loans. And so there's a whole spectrum of disruption to life. And even after that initial shock is gone and you read the statistics and you feel empowered and know that you're going to survive this, you still worry every year when you go back for a mammogram. It's a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, that when you have to go to the doctor's office, when you hear the word mammogram, it triggers something that says, oh gosh, my life's not planning, might not go the way I thought it was going to go. And I have to either accept that unknown or extinguish it and keep moving down my realistic, hopefully happy life journey. But it's all too common because the condition itself is all too common. So the stories are both unique, but they're also the same stories that every breast specialist like myself is going to hear twice a day with new patient visits.
With all the improvement in medical technology and lifestyle, why is it that the numbers are rising?
Well, I'm not sure that lifestyle is improving. When I moved to Asia 15 years ago, people always talked about, cancer being in a bad person, whereas a heart attack was just bad luck. That somehow people equated cancer to something that the client had done, and or genetics. And the genetics are really important because they're a way for us to personalize treatment by understanding the individual's genetics or understanding the cancer's genetics, those being two different things. But genetics itself doesn't make up the majority of the new cases. And so when you eliminate the genetics and you eliminate any, is it more and more mammograms? The answer is probably no. The reason I would say, using Shanghai as the example, why the rates in Shanghai tripled is urbanization, is going from a predominantly rural and agrarian society in 1980 to a city-based, Deliveroo, Android, iOS-based 24-hour life cycle. The premise that we use in the office, we strongly believe that the hormone insulin is the driver of all chronic disease, and that the middle state that leads to, or that a middle state would be obesity and diabetes, or as they call it, diabesity, and that leads to heart attack, stroke, and cancers. Obesity is overtaking tobacco is the number one cause of preventable cancers. So that the public health people look at all the new breast cancers and say, some of these we could never stop, but some of these we could if we drank less, smoked less, moved more, and went to bed earlier. That's never meant to blame the patient. You know, patients don't know. No one knows what they're doing that's contributing to their, to their successes or failures until something changes and you can be introspective. But it's our lifestyle that's contributing to this pandemic growth.
And I'm sure the current pandemic, the COVID, may not have helped as well, because now everybody's on an even more intense 24/7 cycle, aren't they? So do you think that the incidence will there be a spike down the line?
So in some countries, we've already seen short spikes, smaller spikes, mostly because people haven't been going for routine checks. So as the healthcare system is allowed to open up for non-pandemic service, there's a bolus, a lump of patients and clients who are going to move through the system, and it appears that there may be a spike in the number of diagnoses, but it'll be many years before we know if this is a real contributor to further chronic disease. I think we all can agree it's a significant contributor, that the COVID pandemic, to declining mental health, which is a physiologic stress, which leads to adrenaline and cortisol, which leads to high blood sugars, which leads to high insulin, which leads to chronic disease. So it is a vicious cycle.
And you were talking about sleep. Is it the hours you sleep or the timing of the sleep?
Both.
So
people need
what
to
is the
get
ideal sleep pattern that you should have?
probably about 11 or 11:30 and wake up at 6:30 or 7. Everyone's different, but I think we've all seen statistics. We are some of the most overworked, hardest working, least sleeping people in this country compared to the rest of the world. And we all need, we really need, over the age of 40, probably about 7 hours, give or take 30 minutes for the minimum requirement. And the real question to ask yourself is, when you wake up in the morning, do you feel refreshed? And do you feel recharged? Some people are great on 5 hours, but everyone is better well rested. And I think that's probably a more accurate way to get to it. Yeah.
So I just wanted to check with you, Dr. Tucker. In the case of men's breast cancer, would it be the similar sort of symptoms that you'd be looking for as for women, or
Yes
how
and
do you
no.
figure that out?
Men's breast cancer typically presents somewhat differently and somewhat later as a stage because no one's expecting it. And so it's ignored for far longer. They're more likely to show up with stage 3 disease. Stage 1 and 2, I think in Singapore, it's about 50%, 55% now present with stage 1 and 2. In the United States, it's closer to 70% of patients present with stage 1 or 2. But men typically present with stage 3 because it's been ignored for one reason or another. Just don't believe it could be me. But I would probably guess, and this is a guess, I don't have the numbers for it, male breast cancer is almost exclusive to the genetic condition called hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, with this specific gene being something called BRCA2. And BRCA2, if you knew that you came from a family history with a lot of breast or ovarian or prostate or pancreas cancers, then the opposite of what I just said may be true. You may be, if you know your genetics, you can personalize your risk profile and therefore personalize your screening strategy rather than have a generic strategy starting at age 50. So I think it's important for everyone to, whether it's at Chinese New Year, at Christmas, at Easter, if you're with your family, make a family tree. just sort of double check, all the real relatives, not the adopted one. I mean, with a physical, biological tree, and know those 3 or 4 generations, because that's, to me, really insightful and helpful in giving advice for screening, so that you can get away from generic advice to something more meaningful in your family.
A bit more relevant to the person, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Did any of you do that, Amelia, Irene, or Marie? Have you all mapped out your family trees to understand where the potential disease could come from?
We had a lot of family gatherings, like what Dr. Tucker said, but it never crossed our mind to do this kind of tracing. All we do, we gather and have a feast, in the case of Chinese New Year or Christmas. So it wasn't the thing that comes to our mind. So, but however, when we got discovered that we had cancer, it was only always post situation. And then we start to think, hey, was it because of genetic or was it because of lifestyle? And in my case, my family has no history or whatsoever cancer. And I start mapping out knowing that it is my lifestyle that has likely caused me to have breast cancer.
How about you, Amelia?
Yeah, for me, I also didn't really like talk about it and things like that. But during my meeting with my oncologist, we actually map out the family trees, and because of my age, so I actually undergo the genetic testing. So it came back to be negative, which I really thank God for that. So I also narrow it down to believing it's probably lifestyle.
And Marie, in your case, after you heard that, have you always been conscious of your health and have you been checking it, or did that spur you?
To be honest, lifestyle is as hectic as ever. I try to exercise a bit more, which is why I've been cycling quite a bit. Force myself to get out, at the end of the day, shut down my laptop, go out cycling. If I need to, I can come back to work later. But force myself to have a routine, to have some fitness. That's about what I've been trying to do.
I was just wondering, a few years ago, Angelina Jolie had a double mastectomy because of her BRCA1 mutation incident. Does that help in any way? I mean, celebrity doing something so drastic, is that useful for in the case of trying to help people understand and identify potential breast cancer incidents?
I think certainly when there's a public figure, talking about it, it raises awareness, and which is what actually I was trying to do with the cycling campaign that I was doing, to raise awareness, to remind you to, at least, remember to have your checkup every year. But through reminding people on the Instagram of Right With Me fundraising, I also try to put up little tips on healthier living, on cycling, so as to let people have a even deeper understanding of what it takes.
There were actually publications and documentation that there is something called the Angelina Jolie effect, and that it did create a significant awareness around breast cancer, around screening, around the inherited versions of breast cancer. I'm sure there were some articles that say maybe that kind of celebrity and notoriety overwhelms the system in some ways, that you get, for example, average risk individuals at age 30 who want mammograms and shouldn't have mammograms, but because they read the articles, they think that they need to do something. The negatives are some people who want to have risk-reducing surgery, meaning preventative breast or ovarian resections that are technically may not at all be appropriate. I often, when we're having those discussions, we're not advocating as a doctor for or against initially, but laying out the opportunities for a patient for risk-reducing strategies. And we have to work hard to make sure that they understand we're sort of just laying out your choices, not particularly advocating for one. But many people will come in with their minds made up based upon what they read in a magazine article or from a podcast. But overall, I would say that it was very brave of her to share the story, and has generally been a very positive story for communicating breast cancer awareness and treatment. So I think it's a good thing.
Is that something that you would advocate patients to do? Have the mastectomy before it even appears?
Well, let me put it this way. It is something for some women I have advocated. I think that it's always a personal decision. And it's, you could, a woman, a patient, it's not gender specific, but when someone comes into my office and says they want to lose weight, I could tell them, we can just do plastic surgery, we can do a balloon bypass, we can give you medications for appetite, or you could just cut carbs. There are 4 or 5 interventions, and each one has a risk-benefit ratio, and it's up to the patient in theory to decide. That we call that shared decision-making. But I think that after that portion's been done, my patient comes in and shows me a pedigree. So here's a pedigree, and that's a 4-generation family tree. And there are no colorful dots in it anywhere to indicate that there's no cancer. This is 4 generations of individuals, and there's a lot of heart disease, a lot of people living into their late 70s. Here's the patient who would be seeing me, and that would be a really low risk kind of family tree. Contrast that with this kind of pedigree, where all the red circles are breast cancer. And now you've got someone that I saw age 55 with breast cancer, whose mom died of it, whose auntie died of it, whose auntie's living with it, whose great-grandmother died of it. And just for a little bit of genetic confusion, there are 2 cases of breast cancer on the father's side. And this individual was tested, and they did not have the famous BRCA1 gene. They had a different gene called BRIP, or BRIP, which stands for BRCA-related protein. So it's sort of like there's a complex of proteins around BRCA that all work together. But this is what you're really asking. This is essentially Angelina Jolie's family tree, where here she is in the white circle without disease, mom with breast cancer at 42, first cousin at 38, auntie with ovarian, grandma with ovarian. And at that point, what we're saying is it's a personal choice. And in the days before we had good genetics, at the Mayo Clinic, they have great studies going back, dozens of years, that if you come from a family tree like I just described and don't have breast cancer, but know that you probably have a 50-50 chance, having a preventative surgery is nearly 100% reduction in the chance of ever getting or dying from breast cancer. And so it's an absolutely legitimate choice. In a case like Amelia, really young, I mean, I had a patient, under the age of 30 recently, and her test came back positive for a BRCA mutation. And so we had the opportunity to do a treatment-related mastectomy on one side, and the patient elected to have a preventative mastectomy on the other side with an immediate reconstruction. That way she gets the best cosmetic result, she reduces the chance of ever getting breast cancer on the other side, and she only has to be exposed to general anesthesia once. So for her, it wasn't an easy decision. There were multiple visits to multiple doctors, but in the end, that made the most sense to her. Other patients I have with BRCA mutations have done small operations, and they'll do an MRI scan every 6 months or every year and monitor closely because they just don't want to have additional surgery. So it's a personal choice. I advocate that it's an option, but you can't just say that everyone should do it.
The support that comes in, be it your group of friends or your friends or your family, or even foundations like Breast Cancer Foundation, for instance. How important is that in the whole process?
There are a few areas of support that I like to share, which are very important as a breast cancer, as a lady who's going through breast cancer. Actually, the first thing that came to my mind, other than my kids and my job, was financial. I started thinking after seeing the doctor and confirmed that I got breast cancer, and then confirmed again that I was stage 3A, and they prescribed me a heap of treatment. I started thinking, I knew I had insurance, but I started thinking, am I well covered or not? Because the doctor prescribed me, I have to go with it. And I am thankful that I got the financial support, and thankfully I was close to probably 90% covered because I have the insurance rider. But nevertheless, I was financially covered. So that was the support, first one. The second, of course, is my family emotional support that rallies behind me. Let me give you an example. I think most women, when they go through cancer treatment, it's quite traumatic because the treatment not just changes your body, it kind of affect you emotionally as well. So family actually support is very important from a standpoint of encouragement, because very often we feel fearful when we go for chemotherapy, the side effect of chemo after the chemo itself. So family support is the other very important. And finally, to me, very important support that helped me overcome the major challenge. In fact, the key one is spiritual help. I think whoever you are, whatever religion you're in, I think the mental state is something that you need to have peace. The word is peace. Because as we go through treatment, as we face risk, uncertainty, the years ahead of us, whether we're going to survive this or not, etc., is to have a sense of peace and comfort knowing that, someone is watching over us. So the third support I had was my church friends, the religion, and etc. that comes with it. So these are the three. Yes, thank you.
What was the cost of your operation in the end?
My operation itself plus hospitalization cost me, I think, was about 40,000 Sing. But the treatment that comes with it, I had 4 major strong chemo ACDC, and I had 12 less strong chemo that followed after ACDC, and I went for 24 daily radiotherapy. And finally, I went for 28 cycle of Herceptin. And this Herceptin, ACDC and Herceptin cycle plus the lighter version of chemo, each cycle is about 4,000 to 5,000. So that treatment...
What was the total bill?
Sorry?
What was the total amount?
Total amount, including hospitalization and ops, is close to 400,000 Sing.
Okay, that's a deterrent to some because they just can't put up that kind of money, right? Amelia, what was it like for you?
Okay, so for me, I was diagnosed at 28. So during that time, I have a lot of friends and of course my family members that gather around me to really the support for me. They ensure that I go through my treatment regardless what it takes. So they always assure me that putting aside financial issues, all I need to do is to focus on getting well again. So my family members, my extended family from my mom's side, and also my church friends, my godparents, they will always check in on me to ensure that I'm okay, I'm coping with the treatment well. And from time to time, I will have like friends that will deliver food to me to ensure that I eat well too. And like for my parents, my mom will cook for me every day to ensure that I eat healthily, I have home cooked food. Yeah, so similarly to Irene, the treatment plans are quite pretty similar. So all in all, my cost for the entire journey is about 200,000.
200,000.
Yes.
Okay, so it's hundreds of thousands to sort this out. And so all the more you gotta have your medical insurance and everything else just come in.
There's a very big spread between the total cost that could be involved. I think that the surgical costs generally range anywhere from 40 to 100,000, depending upon lumpectomy, mastectomy, and reconstruction, plastic surgery. Then there's the cost if chemotherapy is needed. And there are various recipes for chemotherapy. What Irene shared was that the tumor that she had was called HER2 positive. And there are 2 additional drugs now on top of chemotherapy used. And patients with that form of breast cancer could, over a 1-year period, run up charges probably around $180,000 to $200,000. Whereas a patient who doesn't have that variation in the tumor, their chemotherapy might be $40,000 to $60,000 over the same time period. So there's a lot of good news that we can personalize treatment based upon the biology of the tumor. The bad news is it comes at a financial cost with a lot of new medications. And so, I mean, I don't think anyone is surprised by the fact, at least in North America, I think the number one cause of personal bankruptcy is a cancer diagnosis. And so some of these cancers, treatments can be very expensive. Others are less expensive. I gave a TED talk maybe 5 years ago around this, pointing out that breast cancer is common and it's never going to come at a good time. It's always going to be uncomfortable. It's always going to be expensive, and it's always going to make you worried that it comes back. And which is why prevention is the best way out of this conundrum, is by educating more people on both primary prevention so that they don't get breast cancer or chronic disease in the first place, and then secondary prevention, which means working with cancer patients, people who've had cancer in the past, as well as their families who are by definition high risk, working with them to prevent new cancers or second cancers or other diseases from coming in, because for most of these problems, there's a single common pathway that leads to chronic disease, and that can be reduced through diet, lifestyle, nutrition, activity, sleep, etc. But the price points, they can be inexpensive, but they can be wildly expensive, but none of them are particularly cheap.
Yeah, okay. And Singapore being sort of an aging population, do you expect the cancer incidence to rise over the next few years and decades?
The incidence continues to rise. The cure rates continue to improve, which means you're going to survive it. And the incidence of breast cancer in the under 49 group is increasing faster than I think the incidence after age 50. So it's right now, I mean, and this is developed in developing countries. These lifestyle cancers are really becoming a drain on society at every level, personal to community.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We've run out of time. I see Dr. Tucker has been responding to queries in the Q&A directly, so hope you had a chance to look at those. Thanks for doing that. And for those, there were some questions that came up which were also addressed in the conversations that we've had. Amelia and Irene, thank you for sharing your journeys with the disease, and hope you in a better state of mind after all of that to take the journey of your life onwards. Marie, thanks for sort of initiating this whole discussion, and hope your biking will continue to raise awareness of the issue. Dr. Tucker, thanks for all that, the help, the information that you've shared. I think it's probably useful for everybody to also take on some of the things that you've shared in the Q&A. A few thoughts: daily exercise, reduce or avoid alcohol, more and better sleep, overnight fasting. Overnight fasting is on a daily basis, so you don't eat for 13 hours.
It's actually there's published, studies that show a 13-hour overnight window. So 13 hours from your last meal until your next meal the next day, that breast cancer patients who had already been treated and been through their treatments, if they followed that 13-hour overnight fast, had a 36% reduction in the chance of breast cancer ever coming back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So that's a pretty well done study. Yeah.
Okay. And of course, the last thing is don't smoke. Thank you, everybody, for all the inputs into this discussion. And I know we've barely scratched the surface of it. There's a lot more that we can talk about. And maybe it's something that we can take up at a later point. But thanks again to everybody for being in today's discussion.